Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. As Omicron variant grew by 600% in 1 week, Biden plans to mail 500 million test kits to homes. Manchin opposed child tax credit because he says it would be used for drugs. The first Muslim mayor of Dearborn appoints a Muslim to lead police department. Maulana Rumi cannot be detached from his Muslim identity, expert says. Taliban say government has right to be officially recognized. The death toll surpassed 200 after Philippines typhoon. And our top story tonight. Omicron has surpassed other variants to become the dominant version of the coronavirus in the United States. It accounts for 73% of new infections last week, federal health officials said Monday. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report a nearly 6-fold increase in Omicron's share of infections in 1 week. President Joe Biden announced Tuesday that 500 million new tests will be made available next month. He's also deploying 1,000 military medics to help out with the emergency households load. The tests will be free of charge and mailed on request. Here is what President Biden announced today.
We're prepared today for what's coming. In March of 2020, we were not ready. Today, we stockpiled enough gowns, masks, and ventilators to deal with the surge of hospitalizations among the unvaccinated. Today, we're ready.
U.S. Senator Joe Manchin's refusal to support the child tax credit in the Build Back Better Act stems from his belief that parents might use the money for drugs, according to reports. Progressives on Monday were outraged when the West Virginia Democrat said he cannot support the $1.75 trillion social spending and climate policy. 36 million families nationwide would lose any further child tax credit payments after the new year. According to the Huffington Post, before Manchin announced his decision Sunday, he privately told colleagues he thought parents would waste the monthly payments on drugs. Progressive news outlet The Tennessee Holler tweeted that Manchin's comments show an inhuman disdain for regular people. Meanwhile, America's largest coal mining union issued a statement asking Manchin to support Build Back Better in Senate. We'll be discussing this in detail in our in-depth analysis segment, so keep watching Muslim News. A veteran of the Dearborn Police Department, Commander Isa Shaheen, will serve as the first Muslim chief of police. He has served with the Dearborn Police since 1998. His appointment comes at a time when the city is seeing demographic changes and calls for more diversity in city departments. Mayor Hamoud, who announced the appointment, is the first Arab-American Muslim to be elected mayor of Dearborn. Hamoud, in a statement, said that Shaheen is the senior-most executive commander with a strong track record and good rapport within the department. Dearborn is home to the largest Muslim population in the United States per capita. It is also the headquarters of Ford Motor Company. Omid Safi, professor of Islamic Studies at Duke University, spoke about how Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi's works are perceived today in a recent interview with Anadolu Agency. Rumi, who lived in the 13th century, is the world's most popular poet. His work, Al-Masnawi, has historically been called the Quran in Persian. It is filled with references to the Quran, Safi said, speaking on the essence of Rumi's works. Safi called it one of the greatest masterpieces of Islamic literature, written by Rumi. The Masnavi is a poem made up of more than 50,000 lines. It is considered one of the most influential works of Sufism and Persian literature. Safi said despite Rumi's Muslim identity, his work has been secularized, detached from his deep linkage to Islam as a Muslim philosopher. Palestinians' administrative detainees in Israeli prisons said they will boycott the detention orders of Israeli courts as of January 1st. Palestinians gathered in the front of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Gaza to protest the court's administrative detention orders. They stressed the orders are against human rights and the law. Palestinians demanded that Israel put an end to the implementation immediately. An Egyptian court on Monday sentenced prominent political activist Ala Abdel Fattah to 5 years in prison. He was convicted on charges of joining a terrorist group and spreading false news. The Emergency State Security Misdemeanor Court slapped lawyer Mohammed al-Baqir and blogger Mohammed Ibrahim with a 4-year jail term each, Al-Ahram newspaper reported. The court also fined Abdel Fattah $13,000. Prosecutors accused the three of spreading fake news and joining a group seeking to suspend the constitution, laws, and prevent state institutions from functioning. Taliban acting Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi said his government has the right to be officially recognized since seizing power in Afghanistan.
امنیت خیلی خوب شده و حکومت فعلی افغانستان همکار است با تمام مؤسسات خارجی که اونها اونجا میآید کمک میکنه و همچنان افغانستان در شرایط فعلی مساعد است برای پروژه های انکشافی و برای سرمایه گذاری کشورهای جهان. و یک چیز دیگه خدمت شما عرض کنیم، شما می‌دانید در تمام اصول جهانی یک حکومتی که اراضی داشته باشه، مردم داشته باشه، سر مردم تسلط داشته باشه و امنیت تامین کرده میتونه، او حکومت حق داره که به رسمیت شناخته شود. حالی که حکومت ما به رسمیت شناخته نمیشه، این هم ظلم است و حق مردم افغانستان از او گرفته شده. باید هم حق مردم افغانستان داده شود و هم تحریم‌هایی که سر افغانستان از او دور شود.
At an official meeting, delegates from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation said they would work to unlock banking channels to resume the flow of financial and humanitarian aid. The 57-member body's meeting was the biggest conference on Afghanistan since the US-backed Afghan government fell in August. Kosovo agreed with Denmark on Monday to rent the Scandinavian country 300 jail cells for an annual fee of 15 million euros to ease prison overcrowding. The two countries signed a declaration of intent on Monday. Initially, the deal will run for 5 years, according to a joint statement. An automatic extension could be granted for another 5 years. Last week, Copenhagen said prisoners sent to Kosovo will be foreigners subject to deportation after serving their sentences. Since 2015, Denmark's prison population has jumped nearly 20%, and the number of prison guards dropped by about the same proportion. Inmates will be sent to a prison in Gjilan, a town about 30 miles from the capital, Pristina, starting in 2023. The death toll from the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year surpassed 200 on Monday. Desperate survivors are pleading for urgent supplies of drinking water and food. The Philippine Red Cross reported complete carnage in coastal areas after Typhoon Rai ripped homes, hospitals, and schools. The storm tore off roofs, uprooted trees, toppled concrete power poles, smashed wooden houses to pieces, and wiped out crops and flooded villages. At least 208 people were killed, and 52 are still missing. In nearby Malaysia, more than 50,000 people have been forced from their homes, and at least 7 are dead after some of the worst floods for years, officials said. A weekend of torrential rain caused rivers to overflow, flooding towns and villages and cutting off major roads. Many motorists were left trapped in their vehicles for hours. The number of evacuees nationwide rose to about 51,000 on Monday, official data shows. A senior Iranian rights official is calling on France to revise laws targeting its Muslim minority. The French government ordered the closure of nearly 24 more mosques in what is being called a fresh assault on religious freedom. Kazim Gharibabadi, General Secretary of Iran's Human Rights Office, made the call in a Saturday tweet. It came days after France's Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, said on French television 21 mosques that showed signs of extremism have been closed. The minister said French security forces carried out raids at 99 mosques on suspicion of extremism. 6 more mosques are in the process of being closed. A jailed Indian activist and critic of Prime Minister Narendra Modi had his phone hacked using Israeli-made spyware, according to new allegations. Amnesty International did a forensic analysis of Rona Wilson's phone and found evidence that it was infected with NSO group spyware called Pegasus between July 2017 and March 2018. Wilson is part of a network of more than a dozen writers, lawyers, and artists who advocate for the rights of the indigenous communities and low-caste Indians. Since 2018, network members have been detained on charges of terrorism. Meanwhile, the Washington Post is reporting that a UAE government agency placed military-grade Pegasus spyware on a phone used by someone in Jamal Khashoggi's inner circle in the months before he was murdered. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has pledged to continue interest rate cuts that have made the Turkish lira the worst performing currency in the world in the past 3 months. Erdogan was referring to Islamic prescriptions on usury as the basis for his new policy push. We are lowering interest rates, Erdogan said Sunday in televised comments from Istanbul. For a second time in a month, Erdogan has evoked religion to justify the current economic and monetary policy. It is in line with his demands for lower borrowing costs to boost economic growth. The lira has lost nearly half its value against the US dollar in the last 3 months. In a Gaza shelter, animal keeper Saeed Al-Ayer straps a wheelchair made out of parts from a children's bicycle on the hind legs of a paralyzed dog named Lucy. The device has given her the ability to walk and run again at the Salula Society for Animal Care shelter in Gaza City. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs,
and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss Senator Joe Manchin's attested statement on Build Back Better plan, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. Senator Joe Manchin has acquired a whole lot of power in the world. He is sucking oxygen from the media, no other voice except him, and him. He must be enjoying this moment. But at the same time, he has taken the Build Back Better plan into drain. How did he acquire so much power? Why he is so stubborn? And how a Democrat got elected in an absolutely red state? And what can be done about it? I'm wondering about this question as everybody else does. But I have someone who can help us understand that. And he's an associate professor of economics and president of Global Institute of Sustainable Prosperity, Dr. Fadil Khaboub. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Alaikum salam. Thank you for having me back on the show.
Are you enjoying the power of this particular senator?
I don't think anybody is enjoying what we're seeing in the Senate right now. To answer your question on the power and influence that Senator Joe Manchin has acquired over the last year or so, it's a very simple situation in a sense that the Senate has been divided 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, which means for President Joe Biden, every piece of legislation that his party wants to pass really needs every single vote, plus possibly the intervention of Vice President Kamala Harris to break the tie. And that means that the more conservative Democrats in the Senate, like Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kristen Sinema, happen to have the 50th vote, which means they can stand there and withhold their vote until they're fully satisfied with the content of the bill that's being debated. And because Senator Manchin is fiscally conservative and has been very conservative on environmental issues, on climate change, he managed to essentially hijack the entire process to his satisfaction. And it looks like he's winning.
Isn't this an amazing bargaining process he has engaged in? That the package which President Biden wanted was more than $3.2 trillion or something. Now the package being discussed is half of that, and he is still saying no. So do you think rest of the Democrats, 48, 49 of them, are playing their cards right?
No, I don't think they're playing their cards right at all from the beginning of this whole process. First of all, the 3.5 trillion or the 1.7 trillion that everybody's talking about in terms of the original size of the bill and the ultimate much lower size of the bill, this is going to be over a 10-year period. So the annual amount is actually very reasonable. I would say actually too small, not too big. So that's one part of the problem, is that most Democrats in the House, in the Senate, and the media has kind of bought into the narrative that this is a big spending bill when it's actually not. By comparison, if we look at the military spending bill that just passed last week, upwards of $800 billion for 1 year. If we use the narrative that the military budget is $8.5 trillion over the next 10 years, everybody will be up in arms about inflation and too much government spending, but not at all, because we call it the military spending and we call it by its name as an annual budget, not a 10-year budget. And the Ministry of, the defense budget ended up getting $25 billion more than what they actually asked for. That's just to give you a point of comparison. And it passed with a crushing majority. I think only a handful of senators voted against it. So it's really about setting the priorities straight and understanding why Senator Joe Manchin and the other 50 Republican senators are opposed to it. That's really the problem. Putting too much of the focus on Joe Manchin kind of distract us from why the rest of the Senate, not even a single Republican senator, is on board with the issues that matter for the American people. And it's centered on economic issues. There's some political, ideological issues around it, of course, but on the economic arguments that Joe Manchin and other Republicans have been making is that this is too much spending. It's going to feed the inflation pressures that we currently experiencing. And he argues that it's also the problem of the national debt, that he feels it's irresponsible for the federal government to commit to more spending before we reduce the national debt. And these are the biggest myths that we've experienced in terms of this public debate. And unfortunately, the Democrats in particular have been too weak and incapable of addressing why this additional spending is not going to add to inflation. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it would reduce the risk of inflation, and why this concern about the national debt is completely misleading. And I'm happy to discuss those.
One of the challenge which I see here is that, a report came out that he agreed to this, he agreed to that, and the last thing which he doesn't want is the child tax credit. And he doesn't want it because the people are going to use it for drug abuse. Does his state has a problem with drug abuse, or is it, why is, the children tax credit is the last thing which he wants to oppose?
Yeah, well, the state of West Virginia is the capital of the world when it comes to the opioid crisis in the United States. It's the costs to society is unbelievable. So his argument that we should prioritize Social Security, we should prioritize Medicare and Medicaid before we add more social spending commitments is really misleading, because the cost of inaction in terms of the lost health that children will be experiencing, early childhood development, education, on the loss of income potential during their lifetime is massive. And that actually feeds into the poverty traps that many communities are in today. So he's completely wrong on that particular point. I would argue investing more in children, investing more in communities today will massively reduce the social cost and the economic cost that we experience over the next several decades. In terms of his concern about inflation, when we go back pre-COVID, right before the pandemic hits, and we look at the last 20, 30 years and look at the actual sources of inflation, the inflation pressure points, we find four major drivers of inflation. And those drivers will remain after we hopefully finish with this pandemic and its current economic effects. And those four pressure points on inflation are real estate, healthcare, higher education, and energy and transportation. Those are the drivers of inflation in the US. So the drivers of inflation have two sources. One is lack of productive capacity. In other words, we have shortages, actual lack of access to resources in health, education, energy and transportation, and housing. So if we don't address the shortages in those areas, if we don't build more capacity by investing more, those inflation pressure points will remain. The second source of inflation pressure point is abusive market power. When you have key players in key industries who can raise prices simply because they can, and the pandemic actually allowed them even more market power because of the supply chain disruptions and so on. So this is the responsibility of Congress, of the Senate today, to invest more in terms of building productive capacity in energy, transportation, housing, healthcare, making it more competitive, more accessible, in taxing and regulating abusive market power in energy and housing and transportation. All of these things, when it comes to somebody like Joe Manchin or the Republican Party, are not acceptable because of their how close their political ties are with the corporate powers in these industries. So this is fundamentally a question about democracy, not a question about inflation per se, because we know how to deal with inflation. You build more capacity by spending more, not spending less, and you tax and regulate market power out of existence, which the political establishment is not willing to do. So that's where the conversation should have been by the Democrats. Instead, they fell into this trap of accepting that, yes, the bill is too large. And number two, accepting the terms of the debate, that this is about inflation and inflation is out of our control and there's nothing we can do about it. Of course, there is something we can do about it. It's in the hands of the same senators and congressmen who are shifting the debate in the wrong conversation and shifting the conversation to the Fed, to the Federal Reserve Bank, which has no way of addressing these sources of inflation, because the Fed raising interest rates or lowering interest rates cannot touch the abusive market power of corporations. Congress can. It can't invest directly in renewable energy or in logistical capabilities in the US. These are way outside the jurisdiction of the central bank. So unfortunately, and this is where my pessimistic side comes out, it looks like the political establishment is not going to be able to do the right thing, tax and regulate and invest strategically. And it looks like the Federal Reserve Bank is only left with its simplistic tool, which is raising interest rates to slow down the economy, cause a recession. And we're going to end up with kind of a situation of muddling through, especially if the COVID disruptions globally continue to feed these inflation pressure points related to logistics and supply chains.
Professor Haboob, you said that it is not an issue of inflation, but issue of democracy in our country. Now, Joe Manchin is a Democrat, but comes from a red state. But that red state, more than 75% people are in support of Build Back Better plan. So how come this senator feel himself so liberated from the public opinion of this poor state of West Virginia?
Yeah, that's actually a very complex situation that we have right here. And I think his capacity to convince his constituents that more spending that would actually improve their quality of life, create jobs, create resources for them, his capacity to convince them that more spending will actually hurt them is not uncommon. I mean, this is a communication strategy that the Republican Party has been using for decades. So, I mean, if you ask me personally, if Joe Manchin really belongs in the Democratic Party, I think he's actually acting like a Republican, using Republican communication strategy, using Republican talking points. He just happens to be in the Democratic Party. Why? Because historically, working class communities and mining towns and so on historically used to be Democrats. And the labor movement in the U.S. was a key force behind the Democratic Party. But with deindustrialization, with everything that we've seen in the U.S., in the Midwest and the Rust Belt in particular, since the 1980s, 1990s, has completely weakened labor unions, completely thrown working class communities under the bus. And it was done not by just Republicans, it was done also by Democrats. So the Democrats started to lose their base, their working class base, and these neglected communities. And we've seen it in 2015, 2016, when Trump came to the Midwest, when Bernie Sanders also came to the Midwest. They really pinched a nerve in working class communities by telling people in working class communities in the Rust Belt, in the Midwest, that both the establishment Democrats and Republicans have promised you a just transition with all the free trade and deindustrialization and outsourcing of jobs, and they didn't deliver, both Democrats and Republicans. So both Trump and Bernie Sanders promised a different economic policy framework. Of course, we know what the Trump narrative was, and we know what the Bernie Sanders narrative was. And those narratives really pinched a nerve, as I said, in this part of the country at least, and fired up a lot of voters in 2016. And those leaning to the left went with Bernie Sanders, leaning to the right went with Donald Trump. So today, with the narrative of Joe Biden and the establishment Democrats, it doesn't really connect on a personal level, on an emotional level, with voters in West Virginia and Ohio and Michigan and deindustrialized communities, because it sounds like more of the same narratives that they heard under Bill Clinton and Obama, which didn't deliver any improvement in quality of life. So as long as we have the same kind of relationship with voters in working class communities as the traditional Democratic Party narrative, we're going to continue seeing more support for candidates and lawmakers like Joe Manchin.
Well, sad to hear that, but thank you so much, Dr. Fadil Khaboub, being with us, a professor of economics and president of Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.